Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for our Vertical Insight Symposium on Airport Security, sponsored by Acre Security and HID Global. To get us started, please introduce yourselves in the chat feature. Let us know who you are and where you're calling from. My name is Courtney Kay. I am a manager of industry relations at the Security Industry Association. The Security Industry Association is the leading trade association for physical security technology businesses with more than 1,700 member companies. In the welcoming slideshow, you should have seen some of our upcoming events, including Securing New Ground and ISC East coming up in the fall. We also have in September our symposium on higher education security. So you can learn more about these events and register at securityindustry.org. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items. Today's session is being recorded and will be posted after the event to our webinar archives page. So if you miss anything or you want to share the event, you'll be able to do so. Please submit your questions using the Q&A feature. We'll have a dedicated Q&A time today with all panelists prior to the presentation on the Screening at Speed program, which will start approximately at 2:20 p.m. And before we get started, I want to make sure to thank our sponsors again, HID Global and Acre Security, and our partners, Airport Council International North America. Today's conversation is focused on security at airports. As we approach the 25-year anniversary of 9/11, if you're joining us here today, you know how much the security industry in airports has evolved and is still evolving. Security technologies play a vital role in protecting passengers, employees, and assets, and also supporting resilience and compliance. Today's event will explore emerging risks, innovative solutions, and best practices that strengthen airport security and enhance operational performance to keep the aviation ecosystem safe and secure. Importantly, we're going to hear from experts in airport security about their experiences and also from practitioners about innovative solutions and how you can take advantage of technology and data in your security practice and implementation. So to get us started, I'm going to interview our panelists, Chris and Patricia, to learn about the priorities of airports today. We will then have two demonstrations from our sponsors where they're going to show us industry perspectives on airport security and technology. And finally, while TSA was unable to make the session today, we are going to have a presentation from DHS Science and Technology about their Screening at Speed program. So Chris and Patricia, thanks for joining us today. It's great to have you on. I am going to ask you both to tell us about yourself, to tell us about your role and organization, and then please to answer the question, from your perspective, what is the single greatest challenge that airports are facing today in security? And I know that that's a broad question, so take it wherever you desire. Chris, I'll let you go first.
Great. And thanks so much, Courtney. Really appreciate the opportunity to participate today. And good afternoon, or I should say good morning also to those on the West Coast. My name is Chris Bidwell. I'm Senior Vice President of Security at Airports Council International North America, or ACINA for short. And ACINA represents the owners and operators of airports in the United States and Canada. ACINA member airports employ more than 95% of the domestic and virtually all of the international airline passenger and cargo traffic in North America. And we also have 350 aviation-related businesses as members. So we advocate for policies that strengthen the ability of commercial airports to serve their passengers, their customers, and their communities. So in terms of my role, I'm responsible for leading the security department and am the secretary, or committee secretary as we call it, for the ACINA Public Safety and Security Committee. And the PS&S committee's mission is to enhance the safety and security of airports by providing recommendations to industry and government on policies that enhance aviation safety, security, and efficiency. So in this role, I serve as a subject matter expert, providing guidance on security policy, and I monitor domestic and international aviation security developments, as well as regulatory programs affecting security at North American airports. A key focus is facilitating communication between airports and the U.S. government. and I work to ensure the airport perspective is considered as aviation policies are developed. We also advocate for Congress to provide adequate funding for TSA staffing and technology, something that I'll touch on here in just a minute. One of our key areas of focus also is promoting outcome-focused, risk-based approaches for the development of aviation security policies. And these policies should be informed by the latest intelligence information. So in terms of the greatest challenge that airports are facing today, I would say that it's one of funding. And the reason I say that is TSA is chronically underfunded. Congress, through the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2013, required an increasing portion of the September 11 security fee to be diverted for non-aviation security functions, such as debt reduction. And each year, that amount that is diverted increases by 40 million. And that's a lot of technology that could be purchased with that money. So in terms of the practical implications of TSA underfunding, you have inadequate transportation security officer staffing levels at checkpoints, although I have to give TSA credit, it does a great job using its staffing allocation model to effectively apportion the limited staffing resources that it has between individual airports. But the lack of funding occasionally results in TSA not being able to open checkpoints early enough, and in certain cases, checkpoints opened after the passenger arrival curve can't recover. And this results in long passenger wait times. And also, the other thing is this underfunding results in an inability for TSA to procure and deploy the latest screening technology at airports. So in many cases, TSA has encouraged airports or airlines for that matter to utilize the capability acceptance process. This is a program that TSA has established for the industry to purchase and gift technology to TSA to operate. Now, you might question, why is there this gifting program when TSA is collecting a fee that was mandated for Congress for just this sort of thing to purchase and deploy technology? Well, in certain cases, many airports don't have the funding to purchase this screening technology and gift it to TSA. So that results in delays in replacing poor performing, as an example, explosive detection systems that have long outlived their useful lives. Technology really provides the ability for the enhancement of both security and efficiency and the ability to handle the growth in traffic. And that's why we continually advocate for TSA to be appropriately funded, whether it's for staffing and or technology. I just wanted to mention a couple more things about the practical implications of underfunding. When you have long lines or groups of people in public areas, that's arguably more difficult to protect for the airport. And at the same time, there are an increasing number of protests at or leading into airports. And, in terms of infrastructure modifications, many airports weren't designed for the post 9/11 style security, and it necessitates an increasing amount of space at airports. And this necessitates, again, costly infrastructure modifications. So airports support more than 12.8 million jobs and $619 billion in annual payroll. They also contribute more than 1.8 trillion in annual economic impact. So at the same time, airport capital needs continue to grow. Airports report needing $174 billion for projects between 2025 and 2029. This represents a 15+% increase compared to ACINA's 2023 to 2027 production or projection rather. So infrastructure needs in terms of their project type for terminal buildings, it breaks down to 72.8 billion. Airfield projects, 40.6 billion, and security and environment, 5.2 billion. And at the same time, airports are increasingly burdened with and constrained by debt. So clearly, the funding issue is one of the biggest challenges.
Thank
Patty?
No, I was just gonna say thanks for your insights on that, Chris.
Well, thank you.
It's very interesting to hear from you the impact of the funding on security operations and how they go hand in hand. And I'm sure Patricia has some comments on that as well. But I'll just repeat the question one more time, Patricia, and then we'll get you to answer it. So from your perspective, what is the single greatest security challenge that airports are facing today?
Yeah, thank you very much, Courtney. And as you noted, really timely to have this conversation coming up on the 25th anniversary of 9/11. Um, I think we're going to have a lot of opportunity over the next, coming weeks to think about the evolution of threat, to think about the evolution of the procedures we've used, the technology we've used. What does that look like, both from the passenger perspective and those who own and operate airports, as well as how do we continue to incentivize innovation going forward? And thank you to Chris. What a great setup for me to talk a little bit about threats. So first off, Patty Cogswell. I am currently a partner with Guidehouse, a consulting firm. I serve federal, state, local, as well as some commercial entities in security activities, including everything from processes to best practices for how to implement technology solutions and support some of them. But probably just as important for this part of the conversation is I spent 24 years in government service, including serving as the TSA Deputy Administrator before coming to the consulting side. So I want to spend just a few minutes today talking about the continuing evolution in our threat and risk environment. And just as a setup, I think everybody in this community well knows that risk overall is a function of threat, vulnerability, and consequence. So let me just start a little bit with that threat environment that we're seeing. I think it's really important. For a long time, I kept hearing from people, yeah, you keep telling me about these new threats. Well, why can't we stop working on the existing, the old ones? And I always had the unfortunate responsibility of explaining to them that those longstanding threats remain and continue to morph. One day, maybe we won't talk about identity and document fraud, but today is not the day. It continues to be a really significant issue. And I think y'all just have to look at TSA's top 10 each year and some of the other things they put out just to see some of what they're seeing on an ongoing basis at the checkpoint. But just at the same time, think about how, as we stepped up the requirements and expectations for what somebody would coming through the checkpoint, how the threat actors started looking at the entirety of the envelope and the wider environment. Everything from insider threats to unmanned aerial systems to cyber have only become more regular, more common in the environment we are in. I want to spend just a few minutes on two of those. Cyber in particular is one that, I used to get asked all the time, what keeps you up at night? Cyber keeps me up at night. From cyber criminals to nation states. This is something I expect us only to see more of. We have democratized the threat vectors, the ways people can access threat tools, and they have no compunction about executing. And if you think in particular right now, not all that long ago, I used to talk with various owner operators of critical infrastructure, and they would say, why would a nation state target me? And now we are seeing water systems being targeted by Iran and others because of the heightened military activity across the Middle East. So I would encourage all of us to sort of rethink a lot of our long, thought processes about who is a target. Second, I want to talk about is UAS, unmanned aerial systems. Incursions are increasing exponentially. I know Chris has a ton of stories, but I will tell you the airports I have visited over the last year described in great detail to me the investments they were making, both in tech to identify and track, but also the human processes, practices, and exercises they are using with their technologies to be able to identify, counter, respond, to identify who the actor is and take appropriate response. Just to put it in perspective, there were more than 3,200 drone sightings reported near control towers and near airports by pilots, according to the FAA, more than in 2025. That was already a 25% increase over the prior year, and I don't see this stopping or slowing. So why is this important for this kind of the conversation? Let's talk about that vulnerability and consequence, because at a certain point, the threat is the threat. We can only take out so many of the threat actors. When you talk about something like cyber, it's out, right? The threat vectors, the threat tools are out. And so we have to talk about how do we decrease vulnerability and decrease consequence should those occur. We all have seen stories of when an airport can be shut down for hours because of a potential UAS threat. Nothing blew up. There was no explosion. But because of the threat, there was an enormous set of revenue losses for the airport and airlines, as well as millions of passengers inconvenienced, and of course, the impact on all of the planes being mispositioned because they are not where they need to be, impacting all of our airspace. I just want to highlight one last thing in this section before we go on to the next piece. While it's always absolutely critically important to provide the right security framework and manage security risks, I think we have an especially important role to get this right in the current time. As many of you know, we are in the midst of the decade of sport, where travelers are moving across the United States and around the world to come to the US to attend a series of major sporting events that we in the US are hosting. Through this, we have the opportunity to set the standard of how to continue to evolve, improve, make sure that we are managing this risk environment correctly. And others are watching. I really see this as a huge opportunity for us to get this right and help set the path forward that helps chart us into the continuing threat environment we're going to see in the future. Thank you, Courtney.
Thank you both. These are great insights to set us up just hearing about the priorities in airports today. And we have actually a few questions already coming in, and I just want to do like a fire round for each of you before we move to the next session. And continue to put your questions in the Q&A box, please. I love this type of interaction. But Patricia, you mentioned the role of cyber and how it keeps you up at night. I know a lot of our members would like to know, so how do airports better prepare for increasingly interconnected cyber and physical risks? This is something we're talking about all the time, this convergence. So just, a quick answer on that would be great.
Yes. Um, and this is an area where I think many of you are probably tracking. Over the last several years, we have had a number of new regulatory processes put in place to help set standards and set expectations so that there is a common framework. I know one of the things I used to hear, frankly, a lot from my critical infrastructure colleagues out in industry was how important it was that, frankly, security, it can only be a differentiator, a selling point that is something that you sell to people to a certain point, especially in a place like aviation, right, where it's such an interconnected environment in the first place. So you need to make sure that we are looking for ways to set a common set of incentives, right? Everybody is similarly incentivized because they recognize a threat to one is a threat to all, because it threatens the industry and people's trust and belief in the safety and security of aviation. As Chris noted, a cornerstone for us, frankly, in the global marketplace, as well as our economic livelihood here in the United States. So what I like to think about is, how do we encourage folks who, not every, and I'm going to talk very broadly about infrastructure rather than solely just aviation potentially, but thinking about how to increase knowledge and awareness of what the threats are and how something that maybe wasn't previously targeted at them you may now be a target. And where maybe before you could say, oh, yes, the US government, because this is a nation state actor, they're responsive and responsible for the primary interaction. Well, they may be still responsible for countering the threat piece. We very much need owner operators to really think about that vulnerability and consequence mitigation. That is the most critical role that they could be taking on. So, what does that mean? That really means absolutely important to set integrated security strategies. How does an airport, for example, think through, and there is good guidance out there on how to do this, an overall aligned cyber physical unified strategy, how to think through what could a cyber impact here mean in terms of the physical world, and frankly, the reverse. But also that risk environment more broadly, right? So teams need to understand that variety of threats. They need to think through that spillover or promulgation across system barriers. It's not just this piece and what happens with this piece, but how it can impact the connected, dependent technology systems, connected, dependent physical systems, and turn into, frankly, a bigger risk than any one single piece alone. And then the last piece goes with it is once you've sort of set that out, you understand your risk environment, you understand your strategies. You both need to invest in real time monitoring and incident response opportunities. You need to practice your responses, and you need to ensure you are setting expectations for a very clear collaboration with all of the external partners that are needed as part of that response. Everything from, hey, you've got a dependency on a secondary system that serves 100 airports. You don't own it, you don't operate it, but you are dependent on it. You can both infect them and they can infect you, right? And so making sure that you are constantly cross proliferating what do you see in terms of the threats, the vulnerabilities, and how to manage those consequences along the way. I'll stop
Thank you
there.
for that. No, that's great. I really, really like that framing of vulnerability and consequence. I think that's really important, for everyone to understand and be constantly thinking about. Chris, I have one question for you, which is about your role in advocating to Congress. So, how does you approach your advocacy role in light of this being the biggest challenge? That we had someone write that in.
Well, I mean, we've redoubled our efforts and highlight the key areas of focus for funding needs because it's really a symbiotic relationship between airports and TSA. Airports can't survive without TSA, and TSA can't survive without the industry. So that's one of the things that we highlight. And then we also highlight the efficiency gains that technology provides, right? And it's not just the efficiency gains, but it's also gains in security, right? I mean, you look at the just to use an example, computed tomography. It provides the most sophisticated detection capability for the transportation security officers, the ability to look at an image in 3D and distinguish between what is and what is not a threat. And then it also provides efficiency gains. So, that's what we try and explain as part of our advocacy efforts in discussing the need for additional funding with Congress.
Thanks, Chris. And
Can I go back and
yeah,
Patty did a great job talking about cybersecurity, but I just want to highlight the fact that airports have done a lot to implement cybersecurity measures, right? And much of what they've done is separate and apart from any regulatory requirement. And you'll hear airports say that safety and security are top priorities. That's a philosophy. That's something that they live by. And therefore, they have very mature cybersecurity programs. And then TSA came along and mandated what I will refer to as three separate phases, if you will, or security program amendments or requirements for cybersecurity enhancements. And airports have implemented those, and they're working with their TSA inspector partners on demonstrating how they are in compliance with the TSA requirements, but also at the same time educating them on the things that they do above and beyond the baseline regulations.
And I would say I think that's exactly what you want is that learning from each other, right? So what is an airport seeing that may be an early indicator of a different type of threat emerging that but they're seeing it live, right? The fact that they can also bring that in is 100% critical and why it's so important to have that back and forth communication.
Thank you
Absolutely.
guys for setting this up because this moves us into our next session perfectly. We're gonna hear from Chris and Patty a little bit more later. Thank you guys for your initial insights for framing the conversation for us. But I'm now gonna bring on Valerie from Acre Security. And after Valerie, I'm gonna bring on Jack. And I've asked them the question from your work in the aviation sector, how can security technology help some of these challenges? And what trends are you seeing that are changing how airports think about security? So they've created great presentations that are going to discuss their innovative solutions and the role of security and data. And Valerie, I will give you the floor now.
Great. Thanks so much, Courtney. So I'm Valerie O'Rourke. I'm the Director for Customer Success for Acre Security. So this is a key vertical for Acre Security, and we have been working, in the airport space for over 20 years. Really, airports are unique in their security requirements, in terms of managing landside to airside access control and all the nuances that go with that. What we are seeing as a business is really modern enabled platforms, open integrations, and leveraging AI, which improves flexibility while maintaining operational efficiencies. And it's really about making better use of the data as well and giving the operational and the security teams the views and the information they need in real time. And a lot of conversations I've had with stakeholders in airports, is that the data is there, it's already available, and how can we get the insights to that data to be able to operate more efficiently? So we're seeing kind of, these trends are and having that innovation layer there to assist with the views and the information in real time. And then Chris and Patty spoke a lot about, financial challenges as well. So what we're seeing from a financial aspect is, airports kind of modernizing incrementally, and not doing a full rip and replace. Really, it's about doing some value engineering exercises across the airport to see, what can be retained, what can be used at the door. It's not a full rip and replace schedule, really, when you're looking to upgrade your security, you can bring in the innovative layer and the data views and have all that information readily available as needed. And also from a hybrid and cloud approach, we're seeing airports move to maybe more of a hybrid than full cloud. But then again, this would reduce the IT burden and the IT financial strains as well. So thanks very much, Courtney, for the warm intro. I will just kick it off here with our presentation. So what we're going into, we're looking at airport security, one view, three fronts. So really what we're covering is identity, physical security, and digital transformation, and really modernizing airport security without disruption. So if we go on to the next slide. So as I said, Valerie O'Rourke, Global Director, Customer Success, working across airports for over 20 years. So working across 14 airports on multiple continents. And really, kind of what's seen is that each airport has very specific requirements when it comes to security, but they will have their own processes internally as well. But really, it's about moving contractors, visitors, passengers, and employees from landside to airside safely, and also vehicle management and managing all that in a safe manner. So sorry, if you could just click back up there for a second. From a regulatory requirement point of view, then airports are governed by the TSA and bound by federal rules as well. And we're going to focus on operations because it's a really key part of airports that, if we're doing a project or an upgrade, that there is absolutely no impact to operations, no flights delayed, and everything keeps running smoothly. Thanks. So we're just going to focus here a bit more on the three fronts, really drilling into the identity. So when we're talking about identity, we're talking about, workforce identity, so employees, but also contractors. And airports have a lot of contractors coming on site, to do projects. They might be on site for a week or months or even years. And really, it's about having a process to bring those contractors on site safely, that the checks are done in the background on the contractors, their health and safety, and all their background checks as well. And automating this and getting the process implemented into the solution is really powerful from an operations point of view, that everything is streamlined and automated and all those checks are done and stored for a full audit trail. And then from a visitor point of view, similar to contractors, but visitors are going through the day pass process. So what we would have is an automated process for visitors coming on site, and then a record and an audit trail also. Some airports then would, require, if a visitor comes on site more than 4 times in 2 weeks or 4 times in a month, based on their own process, they would want that alert, given to their operations team or flagged as well, from their own kind of internal point of view. And then from mobile credentials as well, important from the identity aspect. And then we move on to physical security. So physical security is talking, about access control, readers at the door, panels, controllers, and different levels of access control as well, in terms of RFID, RFID and PIN, RFID and biometrics, maybe at a comms room, but also, segregating parts of the airport, locking down parts of the airport, controlling gates and boarding passengers as well in a safe manner. And then video and intrusion. So when we talk about video and intrusion, it's really, that everything is integrated into one view. So if you have a door forced open or a door held open, that it's alerted in the access control application, and it really gives you that real-time view of the incident, the location and the issue. And then from a life safety point of view, it's really having, the safety measures in place, that in the event of an emergency, that you have a proper route and record of all visitors, contractors, employees on site, and that they're accounted for safely in an emergency scenario. And then moving on to digital transformation, which is our third front. It's really, focusing on cloud and cyber, and we have some deployment options, which I will go into later on cloud, AI and analytics and reporting. So it's really giving that view, and that information that the operations teams need to make decisions on site in a quick and efficient way, and from a resilience point of view as well. So we can pop on to the next slide, please. So really, it's like, as I said, it's stop treating modernization as rip and replace. It's layering on top, and it's building on what you have, really modernizing at your own pace. So what we've observed is, protecting the existing investment, the investment that's made over 20 years, 15 years, protecting and retaining that investment, and modernizing incrementally, and doing, the key parts and the fundamental parts of the upgrades in phased approaches. So prioritizing operational continuity is very important as well. You're in an airport environment and things can't really stop or be impacted by any of the works ongoing. Extend the infrastructure life where practical, and adopt open architecture for flexibility. So the new capabilities piece is the innovation layer that we're talking about, really, and it's focusing on mobile credentials, biometrics, MFA, analytics and AI we spoke about, really the operational intelligence piece, and cloud services. And then it's having that integrated platform so that everything is connected and you have one view, for your operations team and your security team, that they can make those decisions, in real time, and effective decisions as well. Then existing infrastructure. So as mentioned, it's really about protecting and extending. So doors and gates, readers, controllers, cameras, panels and servers, it's kind of reviewing what can be retained and what really kind of needs to be upgraded in a phased approach. So the key observation really is modernization is becoming an evolution rather than a replacement program. We can pop on, Courtney, thanks. So turn one view into decisions, not just pictures. So really we're looking at the operational visibility here and also the operational intelligence piece. So across your identity and credentials, your door zones and events, your live recorded video, your visitors on site, your alarms and life safety and building status, which we've gone into earlier. And then bringing that operational intelligence. So, you know, the insights, the role-based dashboards, executive reporting, compliance evidence, which, you know, we know from an airport environment, there's audits, you know, you have to meet the regulatory requirements. They can change quite dynamically. They have to be brought into the solution, and predictive maintenance. So you might have an area in the airport that's used a lot more frequently. So having a predictive maintenance schedule, you know, that this location should come into a different schedule and be maintained, you know, more often, because there is real risk to injury on people using the locations as well. So that's another key view, and faster response times, of course, as well. Perfect. Thanks, Courtney. Next slide. So we've put in Dublin Airport as our case study. So we have been working with Dublin Airport for over 20 years. They are Ireland's busiest hub, 2 terminals, 4 piers, multiple secure zones, really, you know, employee movement across the airport, credentialing, compliance is a big part. They're governed by the IAA, and they've run on the Acre Enterprise Security Suite since 2005, and also Cork Airport run on the same suite. So it's a 20+ year partnership with 30,000 credentials deployed across the airports and 36 million passengers a year passing through Dublin Airport. So what's deployed is a 3-tier fail-safe architecture, integrations across the DAA enterprise system, such as their loyalty programs, support for US pre-clearance. So if anybody on this call has gone on a US bound flight out of Dublin Airport, they would have custom cleared in Dublin Airport. So we would have worked with the teams at the time and developed a solution to segregate that whole area of the airport. So you're actually marked on US soil when you go through custom border protection in Dublin Airport. And then when you land at your final destination in the US, you can just disembark and leave the airport because you've already cleared customs in Dublin Airport. And then also custom reporting and analytics, which, you know, we've worked with the airport on, but they also have taken this and developed it further themselves internally. So what's delivered? It's delivered across Dublin and Cork Airport. There's over 1,800 access points and many integrations. Compliance is streamlined for Irish and international rules, and continuous operation through power and network loss. And we just have a quote from our security operations manager in Dublin Airport: in all the time that Acre has managed the access control at Dublin Airport, they've never had one major failure of the system in 20 years. Great, thanks, Courtney. And we'll pop on to the next slide. So talking about some deployment options then, so really it's the same platform, it's the same experience, and it's the customer who really decides how they're going to deploy the solution. So either on premise, we've seen a lot more movement to hybrid, and some airports are on premise, or cloud is also an option. However, in the airport vertical, we see mostly hybrid or on-premise approach, and you know, there's benefits with each. So from an on-premise point of view, you have full control of the data and infrastructure. It operates independently, and you know, it suits the strict data residency requirements as well. And really your maintenance schedule is your own also for an on-premise deployment. From a hybrid point of view, so critical operations stay local, but analytics and AI reporting can run in the cloud. Backup and recovery is built in, and it grows with the estate and as the airport evolves. Then from a cloud point of view, so no on-site servers to maintain, redundancy and availability is built in, and continuous updates are faster to deploy, and it's one console across every site. But really, you know, it's at the customer's preference. Thanks, Courtney. So the real risk isn't technology, it's really about transition, you know. So in our experience, really, it's just ensuring the key aspects of operational continuity, that the airport keeps running and there is no disruption to operations. Stakeholder alignment, so lots and lots of stakeholders, whether it's across airlines, tenants, security teams, IT teams, and they all need to be brought along together. And then looking at a phased migration. So value and stages really, as I said, it's moving away from the full rip and replace. And that there's a rollback plan at every stage of the project as well, to ensure it's streamlined. And then staff adoption is important also. So training and hypercare is built in from day one. Thanks, Courtney. Yeah. So again, just looking at the three fronts, one view, your pace. Some of the items that we touched on really are around protecting the investment through phased modernization. The identity is at the core of the security and operations, connected systems and those connected views, and leveraging AI to improve day-to-day decisions. And as we touched on, really, the architecture and operation is at a customer level. So just to finish off, then really successful airport modernization isn't defined by cloud hardware or software. It's really a resilient, connected, identity-centric operation that evolves alongside an airport's requirements and can really grow as an airport evolves and new requirements come into play. Thank you.
Great presentation, Valerie.
Thanks so much, Jack.
And I think we have a lot of similarities in what we're talking about.
Good, good.
So I'm going to share now, and I'm going to be talking about something that I've been speaking about for roughly 8 years since I started in the security industry, and kind of building off of what Valerie just spoke about not having to necessarily rip and replace all of your security products that you've been investing in. And you can go forward with some of the things that you've been investing in, maybe just make some tweaks, and the operational difference is going to be vast. So who wants to board a flight to a more secure world with OSDP? And I know all of you just laughed. I'll never be able to know, but at least in my head, I'll think so. So quick overview of what access control really does. I know most of you already know this, but it's giving access to the right people, access to the right places at the right time. And then in the inverse, we are protecting restricted areas, we're preventing unauthorized entry, and then we're basically just giving access to a better operating airport, right? We're allowing the airport to operate more safely and giving it a flow with identity. That's what we do. So my name is Jack Wagner. I'm with HID. I am the Transportation and Aviation Business Development Manager. And that's what we do. We power trusted identities. So here's a diagram of what an access control card reader looks like actually wired to an intelligent controller or door controller. So a lot of times, but most times at airports, we're using an identity with a physical credential, but your identity could also be your face, a biometric template with a fingerprint, or a mobile credential like Valerie spoke about. But most of the time, it's a physical credential with a PIN for multi-factor authentication in airport environments. So when someone like me presents their credential and puts in a PIN, that information is sent down the wires to the panel, and then the panel is going to communicate with the access control system to decide if that person can get into the door, if the door is going to open or not, if they have access to that area of the airport. And how it's been communicated over the past 30 years is a little bit outdated. And that protocol is called Wiegand protocol. So that protocol was invented around 1974, over 50 years ago. And then it became the common reader interface around 1996. I was born in 1997. That doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It just means that it's old and it still works, but it wasn't designed for modern cyber threats, kind of like what Patty talked about earlier. How it works is we're just sending the card number from the reader to the controller. So it's very simple. It's one function. It basically just sends that card number down to the controller, and then the controller decides whether to open the door or not based on the access levels in the access control system. So it's sent in one direction. It's unencrypted, but truthfully, it just works. And that creates a potential blind spot as well, because of its only function is to go in one direction. I was walking a terminal with a security director at an airport very recently, and I asked them how they wired their card readers, and he said Wiegand. And I said, okay, well, when a reader goes down, how do you typically find out? And he told me that it needed to be reported to him, and a lot of times it has to be seen in person, and then they know once they go and they find that a reader goes down or maybe it's been tampered with. And I said, what if you could actually have visibility into your card readers and know when it's down and know when an event is happening? And he said, well, we need that. Well, with Wiegand, a lot of times you don't get that depending on your access control system. All it does is just send those card numbers to the panel. That's its only function. So it's not very good when it comes to leveraging the modern intelligent hardware that you guys are investing in today. So here's some data. More than 90% of installed physical access control systems still use Wiegand. This isn't necessarily airport specific, but based on the conversations that I've been having recently, the data lines up pretty well. I've only ran into a few airports that are doing OSDP fully throughout their facility, and it's rampant across all end users. And the reason why is because it just works. And until we have an event or until we have something go wrong, a lot of people don't fix what just works. But the data on the right, 92% of 200 airport leaders said upgrading legacy technologies and systems is a key priority. And we need to look at every single piece of a physical access control security system and where our gaps could be. So it's very important that you're upgrading your card technology and your reader technology and your panel technology and everything else, but we have to look at everything, including the communications. So why should we replace Wiegand? I love this statement here. Every critical door is both a security boundary and an operational dependency. So if we were to replace Wiegand and there was an alternative, we would hope that we can trust that the credential identity that is going to the panel is encrypted. We would want to be able to trust each door that everything is encrypted from end to end. We would want visibility. We would want to make sure that we're able to see device health. We are able to see all of our devices in a facility, in each terminal, everywhere across the airport, whether that's perimeter, baggage, anywhere across an airport. We want to be able to check in on these devices and then have continuity to be able to see the whole ecosystem of your devices with these modern intelligent devices that you've been investing in. So the alternative is OSDP, the Open Supervised Device Protocol. And OSDP, it was created around 2008. HID, Mercury, and Linnell jointly created it. And then they transferred the ownership to SIA, to the Security Industry Association, for open stewardship. So all manufacturers could make products that can be OSDP verified because it is the new standard. It is the more secure way. So the Security Industry Association is the steward for that. And it's just a different way of wiring your physical access control card readers. So it's 4 wires versus 6, RS-485. And here's what people always think about when they think about a new wiring scheme or a different wiring scheme is, well, we need to replace all of our wires. And the truth is you don't. 99% of the time, your existing Wiegand cables can be utilized for OSDP. And there are devices that have been made where you can actually test your wires to see if you can use OSDP with your existing wires. But most of the time you can, which is a huge benefit, and kind of what Valerie was speaking about earlier, where modernizing your security system doesn't necessarily need to mean ripping and replacing. We may just need to look at a certain thing that you're doing and optimize it and make it better. So what would you get if you ended up rewiring your card readers or your devices OSDP? You would get a major security benefit. So like we talked about earlier, with card readers only going in one card numbers only going in one direction, now we're getting bi-directional communication with AES 128 encryption. So the card number is actually hidden in transit now. And government facilities, Wiegand does not pass federal audits because it does not have this 128 AES 128 encryption. That is huge to me, and I think the crossover to airports, that should really hit home for airports. The card number is actually hidden in transit with OSDP secure channel, so it's only able to be seen by that panel and by that card reader because there is a key in between. Only devices with the shared key can read and verify the exchange. And then on the left side with Wiegand, unfortunately, bad actors have created cable taps, or some people call them wire sniffers, that you can actually catch that card number going down the line, man in the middle attack, and do replay and actually get through doors with that card number. So even if your card is secure, even if your reader is secure, you want end-to-end security. You want to be able to secure that communication to the panel. And then for airports, and what I've been speaking to a lot of security directors, where the major benefit here is getting the efficiency benefit at operations, which is now all of these devices are supervised. The panel can actually talk to the card reader, and it knows when it's being tampered with or when it loses power. And the major benefit that we are really pioneering and figuring out now is sending firmware to devices from the access control head end. So not only are you able to manage these devices from the access control head end, you can actually send firmware from a centralized location. You are able to push firmware down through the panel to the reader and update them from a security operations center. And it really only takes about 5 to 7 minutes per reader. We've seen every environment's going to be different. And even in some environments, the reader still works. So you don't have to roll a technician to every device. You can, push firmware from the cloud, and it is just a much more efficient way to view your devices, especially when it comes to airports that have, hundreds of thousands of devices. Being able to have this visibility is huge. And visibility speeds up security response. So going back to the airport security director that I was working with that said, when a reader goes down, we don't find out until we go to it. It's so attractive to him because now he can see when a reader goes down in his huge facility and say, we can go diagnose the problem in the security operations center, and then we can respond immediately and get out there and fix it. So faster recognition of the blind spot is huge when it comes to airports and passenger travel, and everything that goes on in an airport is time dependent. So if we can speed up a response based on visibility to devices, it's going to be huge. Obviously, you want to prioritize high consequence airport doors, but I would start in your test lab. I would start and see if you're able to implement OSDP with the existing readers and panels that you have today. And then obviously we want to go to high consequence doors, whether that's airside and perimeter, whether that's baggage in critical rooms. We want to be encrypted end to end at those doors. And then we also want to have visibility because we can't have devices going down or being tampered with. And we want to be able to fix those problems immediately. So migration in phases to lower disruption is key. Taking inventory, this is the most important part, what I mentioned earlier, which is if you've been purchasing product, and this could go for any end user as well, if you've been purchasing product for over the last 10 years, there's a good chance that it's OSDP verified and can do OSDP today. It's just that people have been stuck doing what has worked for the longest time and just wiring card readers in devices in Wiegand. So inventory, map out your controllers, your readers, what firmware are they on? Do they support OSDP? And then do a pilot at your test lab. You should check to see if you're able to do it easily, have all of the technicians and people who are working on the airport facility get familiar with wiring OSDP, and then scale. All new reader and device installations should be wired OSDP. It is the standard when it comes to security for communication to a panel. Anything new should be OSDP. And then life cycle timing to make sure when you're going to replace something, make sure you change it from Wiegand to OSDP for just such a more secure communication standard. So I just want to thank everyone for joining today and listening. That's my LinkedIn there below. If you want to discuss how we can start implementing OSDP at your facility, I would love to speak about it. And thank you, Chris. Thank you, Patty. Thank you, Valerie. And thank you, Courtney, for a great discussion. And security in airports is so paramount, and there's so many different facets. So I'm just always fascinated. So thank you, guys.
Thanks, Jack. I hope you'll stay on. I hope everyone listening has learned a little bit about some of the existing technologies and how to integrate some of your systems in order to enhance your security. I'm going to ask Chris and Patricia to come on. We're going to have a little bit of a panel discussion, and I want to integrate some of the questions that you guys have been putting into the chat into this discussion. So definitely keep putting questions in the chat. And if we don't get to them, we'll try to follow up with you all. So I want to start with you, Chris, because we've heard a lot about different types of improvements that airports could make. You mentioned that funding is tight. So if every airport had funding for just one major security improvement, where would you recommend that they invest and prioritize first?
Well, thanks for this question. And it is really a difficult one, not by no means a softball. And the reason that I say that is because when you've seen one airport, you've seen one airport. And said differently, airport security needs are somewhat diverse and differ between airports. That said, as I mentioned earlier, airports were designed for pre 9/11 style security. And as a result, they've consistently had to modify and expand the space dedicated to TSA screening checkpoints. So, my real suggestion would be for an airport to consider investing in projects that not only enhance security, but also efficiency and also resilience so that they're more secure in the longer term.
Thank you. And I'm going to move to Jack actually, because we know that the airports serve thousands of people, employees, vendors, travelers. What have you learned about balancing strong security with those factors of convenience and efficiency?
Yeah, I don't think security isn't too convenient, right? So there needs to be a good balance, or we've lost the plot. So I think that it can't hinder operations, and anything that we can do to help and speed up operations is a good thing to do. So, I mean, optimizing and leveraging your modern technology to make sure that it is operating at a level that can help all of those things while also not forgiving security is a massive benefit.
And then speaking about that monetization, I know Valerie, you just took us through kind of each of those phases, which was a really cool visual. So thank you for that. But what are some of the practical challenges that airports may face when they're modernizing, um, without disrupting those like daily operations?
Yeah, sure. So like airports really are in a league of their own with very complex, security requirements, moving from landside to airside, boarding gates, so I suppose the biggest challenge really is maintaining operational efficiencies and passenger flow and limiting any disruption. It's really key to plan out these projects and have a defined rollback plan at each phase. And also another challenge is really the financial and budget creep from an airport point of view, because an upgrade for an airport at the door cost is much higher, because you have to have security at the door, you have to take down the door and the gate, and airlines need these to continue to operate. So the cost of actually and the challenge of managing the budget is quite challenging as well.
And with that challenge of budget in mind, I think Chris started us off talking about that, and I think it's been apparent throughout the conversation. Patty, I want to go to you, and I've had a few questions in the chat similar, but how do airports evaluate technology? And, what questions should they be asking vendors when they don't have that much budget to work with?
And first off, I just want to start. Once upon a time when we thought about trying out new technologies, I think awful lot of us thought about the friction created associated with changing out of technology, right? We spend an awful lot of time plotting it out, planning it out. And just like in software land, I think we've all came to a conclusion that maybe a more agile mindset makes more sense. And I loved what all of my co-panelists have said. It set this up perfectly. It's not about rip and replace. It's an evolution. We don't just do this once every 5 years. This needs to be an ongoing investment. Chris's point about how it's efficiency, resilience, and security I would add and facilitation, right? All of these things need to be together thought through as we prioritize and look. So with that, I think the first one is I would say we're already starting to see a lot of change in the mindset from where I'm sitting. Um, well more than that old mindset of I have to do this big, huge infrastructure. We're now starting to really see airports and airlines recognize it can be a significant market advantage for them to be seen as someone who's investing in new technology that makes processes faster, more secure, less friction, or frankly, just more cool, right? And I can't tell you how many times I've gotten to participate in a demo and I'm like, I don't know how much time we're going to save, but this is fun. It's just something new and interesting that you just feel like, oh, we're going into the space age here, right? But along with that, I believe there's a huge opportunity to reframe the role of travelers, staff, and leaders in those decision-making processes, rather than the old signs of pardon our mess or bear with us while we implement. Thinking about how do you make this an adventure, something that's an interesting part of the trip, something that offers a better way to do things rather than inconvenience. In order for that to work, you have to tell people before they encounter it. None of us like to show up at an airport, have a brand new stressful process added on to something that can already be, as Chris highlighted, somewhat chaotic and unpredictable, depending on when we show up and what else is going on that day. But if they know ahead, if they say, hey, since the last time you came, we're demoing this new thing, this is what you can expect it to look like. For staff, if you can say, we're going to be asking, these are the goals we're trying to reach. Here's how we can use your input in how we've implemented, how we integrate it across into this entire evolutionary environment. Tell us what you think. Finding those ways, I think, can dramatically reduce sort of that overhead load that goes into people's mindset. Doesn't get rid of it, but hopefully it can change it a little bit to be more interesting. So with that, my actual argument is actually we should be trialing new things more often rather than less often, rather than doing big bang, big evolutions, more frequent trials, more frequent, I'm going to sub this out. Yes, it means that we're asking people to be able to say, yes, it's okay that the process here doesn't look exactly like the process there. But it also means they get more used to that idea. Frankly, what is it? That adage of being comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? I know how to get information before I travel. I'm excited about the fact that I'm seeing government, industry all invest in this next generation that not only am I thinking about making it safer, it actually, Chris's point, CT machines that are more efficient as well, that maybe hopefully soon will let us carry a water bottle on. All of these things that we'd all like to see. And I'll just emphasize again, my favorite part of all this, we got this decade of sport to get this right, right? All eyes are on. How do we use this to mobilize, all of the funding sources that are available? Chris is being the wonderful advocate that he is in front of Congress and others. I've seen a lot of private equity and other places suddenly being like, hey, maybe this is someplace to make a difference in a way that gives me a lot of hope, frankly. This is a way we are setting an experience. Everybody who attends the games, as an example, this is what they're going to remember. And I'd love to see us really be set apart through those changes.
Something I love about your answer, Patty, is really that you're also talking about something that we don't often talk about on these symposiums, which is the role of marketing and communications. I think
Change management's a thing. Yes.
I I think that's a big role that we don't often talk about when we get caught up in the technology and what's new and how to implement it. But having that transparency and having someone on your team who can convey what's happening and make it like you said, an experience rather than just an inconvenience is a really cool concept. So thank you for bringing that up. One thing I do want to ask all of you is when airports are evaluating technology, what on the vendor side, what questions do you want to be asked? And then Patty and Chris, what questions should airports be asking vendors when they're evaluating technology? I think we have some people on here that would appreciate the answer to that. So I'll let anyone who wants to go first go.
Well, if you look at things historically, particularly when it comes to the physical screening side, I think there's real opportunity to work together more closely to assess capability needs, right? Identify opportunities to upgrade technology to enhance security and efficiency, as I mentioned. But again, historically, most technology is designed, tested, and evaluated based on TSA's needs and specifications. So, given that opportunity for collaboration, consideration should be given for technology applications to address airport needs, right? I mean, if you look at some of the newer things that airports have been implementing, aviation worker screening comes to mind. And what they're leveraging is the capabilities that exist in the passenger screening environment. And that is good, but it doesn't always fit neatly and cleanly in certain airport areas. So again, I think there's that opportunity. And one of the things that I would also highlight is the need, and this is something that we've included in our talking points with Capitol Hill too, additional investment in research and development, right? I think that whereas there was a greater emphasis on that shortly after 9/11, that's dissipated in the intervening years, which is challenging for all of us, quite honestly.
I'm happy to add in as well. I will say, and I loved that several people highlighted the importance of data. And I would just echo very much the point of I'd love to be able to see data across processes end to end for the traveler continuum or the staff continuum experience, right? So that because right now we often have a lot of different entities all having a piece, but being able to see that end to end could really let us rethink processes in a completely different way and might, exactly as Chris is highlighting, highlight where we might want to say, oh, if we wanted to start screening the passenger at the time they enter the building rather than at the checkpoint, what would that mean we could do in changing the technology, as an example? How can we use this to rethink the joint needs across the process to produce a better integrated result, a better experience for those who are growing all the pieces, as well as better security outcomes?
Great. I can go next. Thanks, Courtney. So from a vendor point of view, really, it's about having that connected suite, so it's not just access control. So I'm talking from a security point of view, where we're managing, the access control element and having that connected view that you're bringing all the systems together and that the operations team and the security teams can make real-time decisions, and that we can drill down into the analytics that they need to see, and the reporting that they need to see. And again, I suppose it's working with an experienced vendor in the airport space, because the nuances are quite different, and the requirements of the solution are quite different in an airport environment.
Yeah, I think am I investing in a partner and product set that is evolving as threats evolve? Not necessarily just static. Like we're not just creating static products, we're creating proactive products and also creating proactive solutions to evolving threats. So I think that's super important for airport customers to be asking their vendors or asking their partners. You're not just giving me a product or giving me a service that is not going to evolve with our evolving world, right? So that's what I think.
Thank you all for your answers on that. We have a few questions in. I think, sometimes when we talk about airports, we're thinking about the larger airports. We're thinking about the airports with a lot of resources. We're thinking about large security companies with a lot of resources. So, and this is an unspecific question, so take it as you will, but what are the differences in what we've talked about between those large airports, those large companies, and then the smaller airports, the regional airports, and also some of small businesses and how can they, get into the conversation. So take that as you will, guys, and whoever wants to go first, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I will tell you, and Patty brought up cybersecurity, and I'll give you an example of some of the things that some of the smaller airports have done, right? Because they do have, in certain cases, more limited resources. But one of the smaller airports that is a member of ours, they partnered with a local university to leverage the capabilities of new graduates coming out of cybersecurity programs, brought them on board to enhance their or further enhance their cybersecurity posture. I thought that was a great initiative that I heard about not too long ago. So there are very creative and innovative things that airports do regardless of their size and sometimes driven as a result of their size.
Anyone?
I might just actually speak on behalf in behalf of the importance of the smaller business side of the house. Uh, my experience in government, very much incredibly important to have large entities involved. The reach, the scope they had when I was trying to deploy to 440 airports, really important. But frankly, the incentives for the smaller ones to be more nimble and innovative in terms of how fast they were able to turn over some of the technology changes and sort of the algorithms, their ability to say, I will work with any of the hardware manufacturers. I'm not locked into just one. Um, that is where I can see, in particular, all airports seeing how do I make opportunity spaces for these different types of models? How can I open things up? How can I be have the certainty that comes with somebody who I've worked with before and knows what they're doing at my airport, but also have this wonderful space to bring in innovation and bring in new ideas and be able to meld them together. How do I set up the right structure that allows for, and that would be my number one.
Yeah, I mean, to what I spoke about earlier in my presentation, it's some of the smaller regional airports that are able to actually, get that done and be a showcase to some of these other larger airports to say, look at what we did and what we implemented, and it's made our lives much better. So, especially when it comes to kind of like what both Patty and Chris are saying, is that they can be the innovation leaders. There's not as many hoops to jump through, especially with how big their facilities are.
And I'll ask one more question just to close out this section. Where do you see the greatest opportunity for industry and airport collaboration?
I think for IT and physical security to speak to each other on a very frequent basis as we keep using this convergence. I mean, we all know it's happening. So we need IT to understand physical security, and we need physical security to understand IT so that they can cross check each other and say, "Hey, what you're doing there isn't compliant with what we do," and then vice versa. I think that is the biggest opportunity for our industry overall as security to look at it from a much broader scope.
I agree with that completely, Jack. Same experience, IT, security, bring everybody along together. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
I'll put the plug in, and we've seen some great examples at the airport level. We've seen great examples at state, local level. We've seen some really good examples at federal level. Um, and several people have alluded to it. When we can have collaboration environments and opportunities that are outside traditional procurement paths, so you don't have to go through the I have to know nth degree requirement, and then I go through the 6 stages of process, and then I test it 4 times before I can really actually talk to the person on the other end. When we can shorten that cycle, seen lots of amazing examples. NASA and the defense one is the one I routinely use as examples. Like, how did we get to commercial space flight? Right? It's you change the rubric, you change the model. How can the procuring entity or the government entity help say, I will have a place to test and I will have expertise on not only requirements, but what does safety and security look like? You vendor can work with me back and forth in a much more different, because I want multiple entities who are all really good at this. I don't want just one. And switching that model. And I think that's one where I frankly would just love to see more of this environment where we all have this shared expectation. We all have this shared responsibility for getting the security envelope right. And that means we need more entities playing in the space and bringing the best and brightest to bear.
One of the things that I would add is although each critical infrastructure sector is uniquely different, I think we share some similarities, particularly when it comes to threats, certain threats, I should say, and countermeasures. And so there's an opportunity to benchmark and look across sectors to see what's worked uniquely in another sector and bring that into the transportation or aviation subsector. I think that's a real opportunity that we need to leverage.
I love that answer. I'm always looking to see how we can learn from our partners, whether it's in different industries, different countries, different markets or sectors. I think having an open mind to all of the different solutions is a great approach. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate you guys engaging in this discussion. It's been really great to see your demos and hear your thoughts. And we are going to move on to our last portion of today's event. So I am going to bring on Dr. John Fortune. We'll get everyone set up. I think there's some, gotta pin it right. So everyone is is off. 1 second. Okay. I think we're good to go. So I'd like to introduce Dr. John Fortune. He is the Travel and Trade Division Director in the Homeland Security Advanced Research Projects Agency and of the DHS Science and Technology Directorate. He serves as the program manager for S&T Screening at Speed program. This program is a collaborative effort between S&T and TSA to advance transformative R&D activities that support a future vision for strengthening aviation security effectiveness and improving the passenger experience. Previously, he was a branch chief at S&T's Resilient Systems Division, focused on enhancing resilience of the nation's most critical infrastructure sectors. So similar to what we were saying before about having that really applicable knowledge. And you also came to DHS in 2005, so we can be sure that you know a lot about DHS in this program. I am going to turn the floor over to you, and thank you again for being here today.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. It's a bit refreshing to have an opportunity to interact with colleagues across the community. We're super excited today to have this opportunity. And I wanted to first ask just a logistical question. I did have just a few slides prepared. Is that going to be something folks can see?
Let's see. Can you try to share your screen?
Oh, me?
Yes. Do you have them up? If not, I think I can get them.
I did not have them up. I was not.
Okay.
Hold on.
Let me check 1 second. In the meantime, if you want to start talking about it,
Yeah, and I don't absolutely have to have them, but there's just a couple of visuals in there of a couple of technologies that we're developing that might be cool to pop up. I was going to talk for a little bit of time before we throw this up anyway, so I'll start. I'm John Fortune. I am the division director for the Trade and Travel Division in sort of our newly formed Homeland Security Advanced Research Projects Agency. A little bit of a quick primer history about DHS S&T or Science and Technology. I have been around since 2005, so definitely an old timer in this organization. We were formed legislatively with a Homeland Security Act. We were really one of the few things that were actually new in the department in DHS when the department was stood up. The idea behind S&T was rather than having individual pockets of research and development in TSA and in the Coast Guard and in the Secret Service and in the CBP, the different operational levels of S&T, that we could build efficiency by having a coordinated research and development approach across the full department. So it was kind of a grand experiment to build S&T and have it be a R&D leader for the entire department. And as with experiments, sometimes they, being a scientist, sometimes they work well and sometimes they don't work as well. And so I think the challenges of the growth of the S&T organization over the last 20 years is to sort of, learn and build on our mistakes. And one of the things I think we have done well and have done a lot better over the years, especially in recent years, is really building those strong partnerships and relationships with our DHS component customers. So in my case, in trade and travel, one of our obviously major customers is the Transportation Security Administration. So those working relationships that will be built with TSA over the last several years have been absolutely critical to the success of guiding our research and development program to make sure that we're pointed in the correct direction and meeting the needs of the agency, but also making sure that that we're flexible, that we're adaptable, and that we sort of keep up with the times. And at the same time, I think it's important to think about why S&T was formed as we are. We're not only supposed to be a research and development management agency, which we are, but we also are supposed to be thought leaders for the department in R&D. So we see this, and I'm going to pick on TSA because this could be said really about any of our operational components. But there's so much that has to be dealt with on a daily basis as far as staffing and making sure that the day-to-day airport operations run smoothly. And on the equipment side, a huge amount of TSA's budget goes into operation and maintenance. So we're supposed to be the organization that can kind of take some flyers and take some risk and take risk where it might not even be appropriate for a TSA or CBP to take the risk, because they really are charged with being an operational component, making sure that travelers stay safe, that only the people that are authorized to cross the border, that the president and other protectees are kept safe. There are core mission space that those operational components have to cover. And should those organizations be worried about high risk might fail 2 to 5 to 8 to even 10 year down the road research and development? And we see on the S&T side, probably not. That's our role. We accept that risk because that's our job. And then as we advance technologies and see things that are successful, then we continue to work hand in hand with our partnering agencies. Again, in my case, largely TSA, to make sure that we're going in a direction so we have the maximum possibility of creating successful products that ultimately end up out in airports. So that's sort of a quick background on who we are at S&T and sort of my role. I wanted to beg, borrow, and steal a little bit, and especially since I have a little bit of extra time, I thought some of my colleagues before me pointed out a few things that are really important underpinning things that we think about a lot in S&T and the trade and travel division, and in screening and speed in particular. And a lot of these are things that Patricia said, and I've got a couple things that Chris said, and I just jotted these down because I think these really do underpin everything we do. One is, it's kind of a fundamental question. We used to do these aviation security futures workshops. We haven't done it in a while, but we would bring people in from obviously from TSA, but from other components across the government. We bring people from industry. We bring in airport architects and planners. We'd invite the ACLU because the aviation security ecosystem is large and complex, and we would try to get as many perspectives as possible, and then we would kind of do some ideation about where we are, where we might be, what the hurdles would be, and it would help us kind of think about how we scoped our program. And in the very first one of those, and I'll call him out by name, I think he deserves credit, my colleague, Chris DePrima out of SFO, raised what I think is a really core question, and that is air travel about getting from point A to point B, or is it about the experience? Because where you go and how you get there may not be exactly the same path depending on how you answer that question. And it kind of came up, and Patricia made the comment, make it cool, make it an experience. Tell people in advance, don't blindside them, but work together in this ecosystem to make things better and more interesting and more effective and better experientially. And I think there's a lot to that. And I know we don't have TSA on today, but one of the things that TSA has sought to do over the years is to make pre-check in particular, and kind of as an early adopter opportunity for technology, to make pre-check that enhanced better, cooler experience. And so we work closely with TSA, keeping that in mind. So I think that's one kind of thing, when you think about screening at speed, there definitely is an experience cool factor. It's not the only factor, but it's something that we put a lot of thought into. A second thing is you can't change out everything at once. I mean, it's just not practical. I mean, even with CTs, I mean, and I remember, when Administrator Pekoski was here, and he would give different estimates. It would depend on congressional budgeting in a given year, but it was many years to get just the current best in class screening equipment for carry-on baggage, and that is checkpoint CTs, out into the field. So it's just not practical to put everything in at once. And it's actually kind of, from an R&D perspective, that's a little bit heartening, because technology changes quick. And the idea that as new equipment is rolled into the airport, that we're continuing to develop the next generation, and we don't have to say, if we miss this window, we're going to be stuck with this for 15 years. And what are we going to do with what we do for the next 5 to 10 years? Where's that going to go? So the idea of kind of constantly evolving pipeline for new technology and approaches is I think, a good thing, especially from the S&T side and where we are. And kind of having an agile mindset. I think that's kind of a key thing. And then another thing I know that Patricia said specifically, I mean, test early and test often. We're somewhat constrained. We can't just send something out into the airport that's not pass certification testing and make flight or no flight boarding decisions based on that. But there are things that we can do to get things out early, perhaps in line with other systems. We've worked with our partners, specifically the Innovation Task Force at TSA, to think about how do we get things out. We've worked with the Innovation Checkpoint out in Las Vegas, just to see where we might run into some issues before we get a fully certified system. But crud, it doesn't do this. Wouldn't it be nice if it did this? Wouldn't it be nice if we thought about these things 2 years earlier in the developmental cycle? So I think those kind of themes underpin everything we do in screening at speed. And I kind of want to throw those back out as a foundation before I jump in and give you a little bit more detail about how we're structured and what we do as a program. So I think with that, I'll actually go to the first slide on here. I only have 3, so I don't have a lot of visual material prepared. But our mission, and this goes back to something that Chris said in his comments, which I also jotted down, which is that we are always kind of, almost like a 3-legged stool. We're always concerned about a balance between security and efficiency. We want to be efficient, and we want to be passenger friendly, but never at the cost of security. Security is always job one. And so there's always that balance back and forth between those two. But then there's this problem, this challenge of growth in air travelers. And when in the U.S., when I started working this area, it was about 10 years ago, and 2 million passengers was a big day. That was your Thanksgiving week travel. It was an anomaly to see 2 million passengers. Well, now that's a light day. I mean, our busy days are 3 million passengers, and that's over about 8 or 9 years of growth. So where are we again in another 8 or 9 years? There's that element of the passenger growth, along with the emerging threat space. So maybe it's a 4-leg stool between balancing passenger experience, dealing with growing travelers, and the emerging threat space. So that's kind of what this slide is all about. I mean, there's a lot of challenges here. And once upon a time, I think early on in our investments in S&T in the aviation security community, we were very sensor focused, and we still do a lot of R&D on improving sensors. Not just CTs, not just passenger imaging systems, but looking at what's beyond CT. How do we deal with the fact we still have a pretty high false alarm rate for certain items in CT systems? How do we maybe get liquids on back in the discussion as has been mentioned previously? What do we do about false alarms with passengers and pat downs, and how do we make that system more efficient? So there's a lot of work to be done on the sensor side, and so better sensors is in my solution space here. It's definitely something we work on a lot. But we're in 2026. We're not in 2006 anymore, and the data environment has changed greatly. There's a huge amount of data available, and how do we use data smartly and with privacy in mind? How do we use the AI ML revolution to our favor? How do we think about security as a system of systems, not just standalone systems, but how do we think about how we buy down the risk to the overall systems as we design new security postures? And then one of the things that's sort of been a sort of a holy grail of screening at speed since the very beginning of the program is distributed sensing. We used to talk about curb to gate a lot. I mean, is there a way to somehow consider buying down risk when people do enter the airport? That came up a little bit in the discussion a few minutes ago. So, I mean, there are all different types of approaches that we think about and how to kind of weave this web. And at the same time, our ultimate goal, our vision is, this kind of futuristic end state where we have for lack of a better term, it's cool. I mean, it's different from the airport that we've experienced for the last 20 years. The checkpoints that the equipment's changed, but the way that things are done are largely unchanged. Can we get to that new paradigm, and can we do that in a way that we address increasing passenger growth and we deal with emerging threats, and we understand that airports have cost limitations. I don't know if anybody mentioned it specifically, but space limitations, and that there's definitely not everything can be done at once. So there's definitely that aspect to it. But if we put all our eggs in that basket and only invest in long-term R&D, then we don't meet TSA's short to midterm needs for next generation systems. And frankly, we don't have a lot of success stories. And the budget environment is tricky, and we want to make sure that we're providing value to the department as we try to get to that longer term goal. So another analogy I use a lot is stepping stones to get across a pond. If you've got a good vision, you can have short and midterm successes and end up on the other side of the pond. If you don't have that long-term vision, you'll have some short-term successes. You'll end up right back where you started. So how do we somehow balance that need to meet the 3 to 5 year time frame needs, and at the same time make sure that what we're doing can really be transformative in the long term? And it's a huge challenge. And it's one of the reasons I'm glad I have a lot of really smart people around me on my team here at S&T, but also get to work with great folks at TSA and across industry and the academic community, and other folks that are important to aviation security. So if we can go to the next slide, I'll dive a little bit into some of the specific things we're doing. We're a research and development organization. So if I were giving this briefing, 5 years ago, what you would see here would be quite different. And I'm sure in another, 3 or 4 or 5 years, it'll probably be quite a bit different again, because we have to adapt. And our goal is to roll technologies out and then look at, kind of where the technology opportunity space is going, and also the threat environment, where our customers are, and figure out what the next things are going to be. But I mentioned, we certainly are investing in advanced sensors. So one of the big things is better passenger imaging, ways to improve millimeter wave, so it's no longer portal based, but we have real-time systems. We have real-time systems at our transportation security laboratory in Atlantic City right now. This was sort of a pipe dream 10 years ago, that we have true walk-by screening technology, just really not that far off now. And at aviation relevant, security threat levels, which is a really tough nut to crack. We are looking at new sensor modalities. So in addition to CT for checkpoints, are there ways we can look at things like X-ray diffraction, gratings-based X-ray, better detectors, to help? It sounds techy, but at the end of the day, we're talking about getting people through faster, finding threats at a higher detection rate, and having to open fewer bags and pat down fewer people. So the nuts and bolts of those sensors ultimately has the potential to have huge impacts in the field operationally. We want to be able to do good test and evaluation. So we work closely with our Transportation Security Laboratory, which is part of S&T. And we also work with our friends at TSA at their TSIF, which is co-located at Ronald Reagan Airport here in the DC area, to do more operational T&E. And then I mentioned the innovation checkpoint out at Harry Reid International Airport in Las Vegas. The opportunity to have these test beds, as well as other test beds that TSA can offer to get things out into the field, is really important in this process of developing sensors. You have the middle panel, a system of systems. So Can we look at, something beyond what's next beyond CT? What can meet the deficiencies in CT from either a threat detection perspective or from a false alarm perspective? Can we build other efficiencies in? We've done some work with remote and off-site screening, and did some demonstrations a few years ago, looking at eventually at small airports. How do we move data around, and can we increase the potential effectiveness and efficiency of the TSO workforce by not having people only screen the bags that are in front of them? And that's something the TSA is pushing forward on now. Looking at ways to process data and share data. Can we do things in real time? All important in that integrated systems of systems lane. And then maybe the one that's kind of the most fun is this idea of seamless travel. And this is really more the futuristic work. Can we think about new ConOps? One of the big things we've invested in over the last few years, it started out with just some real informal conversations between some of us on the S&T side and the TSA side on what could be the next big thing. It led to an RFI, it led to an industry day, and then it led to some real no-kidding work. And now it's led to already an airport demonstration out at Las Vegas, and now even a future generation incarnation that's been tested out at CES, Consumer Electronics Show out in Vegas. And also we have a prototype at TSL, and that's self-service screening. Are there ways that we have a self-service screening pod that's designed to be largely self-sufficient and automated, which could be really cool in, say, a pre-check lane at a larger airport where you might have a series of pods rather than a traditional lane. But it also could be something really interesting in a small airport where maybe a single pod could deliver the state-of-the-art CT millimeter wave type of technology in a reduced form factor that could be very beneficial and cost effective, rather than putting in full screening lane for an airport that might only have a few flights a day. We're interested in the data science is a big thing, and I'll admit it's not my area of expertise. That's why I have really great people on my team that run that path. But one of the real cool things we've been doing recently is just looking at anomalies. So not looking for specific threats. We spent a generation looking for printed items, weapons, guns, knives, scissors back in the day, whatever. Looking for specific things in threat detection standards for explosives and other things that don't need to be on the aircraft. But we started some work. We just looked for pattern recognition for things that we don't usually see. And I'll give you one example. When we ran a data set recently, we found a cluster of bags that had golf balls in them, fairly large quantities of golf balls. Maybe they're not very good golfers and they have to bring a lot for their outing. But you would see a cluster, and all the bags that show this particular feature set would have, a dozen or more golf balls. And why is that important? We don't care about golf balls, but if that type of methodology identifies the next big threat before you even know it's a threat, sure, it might detect the iPhone 22 because it looks completely different from the 21. We're okay with that because at some point, you can pretty quickly have the algorithms adapt to say, no, that's no concern. But I mean, it gives an opportunity to find things that are anomalies that we ought to be concerned about before it's too late or before they show up in intelligence reporting. So there's a really lot of opportunity in kind of rethinking how we approach problems that we might not have even been able to consider, 4 or 5 years ago. So with that, I want to go to my last slide, and then I'm going to stop talking and see if folks have questions. I was supposed to have an individual before me kind of laying out TSA Gold Plus. I'm not going to talk a lot about Gold Plus. I mean, whether things feed into Gold Plus or not, I don't think is so relevant from the S&T perspective. Our mantra is we're about getting technologies out in the field and making a difference, for our customers, in this case, TSA. And I say TSA, but things are adopted by TSA. Maybe quickly adopted at international airports, or vice versa. There'll be opportunities to do testing and evaluation with our international partners on the front end as things work through final acquisition from TSA. But the bottom line is, Gold Plus is a model where certain airports would be able to be more forward-leaning in the security space, and we want to be a clear pipeline and input into that, whether it's Gold Plus, whether it's things that the Innovation Task Force and TSA is testing, whether it's the next acquisition. What S&T's role is to make sure that we drive the space forward. And so some of the areas we're looking at are capabilities for smaller airports. So I've mentioned having a single pod there, having other small form factor CTs. We're working on a millimeter wave wand, which would be as a resolution tool for alarms in the AIT. The idea being, we want to pat down less people, so we can have an imaging wand that can do a quick resolution, and we can cut pat downs by 50%. That would be huge. But it could be used for screening at small airports. It could even be used for something like employee screening that was mentioned earlier. Randomized or site specific, smaller, less expensive, more portable. So capabilities for smaller airports, but possible other applications as well. Next generation screening systems. So we're investing in shoe scanners, real-time AIT scanners, things beyond CT for scanning bags, all about improving detection, reducing false alarm rates, and building systems that are more seamless. Operations efficiency, already mentioned remote image viewing, how we move data around, tools that look at how resources are allocated that build in real-time risk assessment. We've done some work out at PNNL, Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, in that area. And at the end, passenger experience is it's always going to be number two to security. Our number one mission is to make sure we support TSA and ensuring people get from their embarkation point to their destination safely. But we're all about doing that as much as we can with improved passenger experience. So with that, I'm gonna wrap and take any questions. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all today.
Thank you so much for that overview. I think it's really important the work that you guys are doing, and I think it's important that our members and everyone listening understands what it is that you're doing. Just a reminder to please continue putting your questions in the chat. We have a few more minutes, so we can get to some of them if you all put them in. But I'm going to take moderator's privilege to ask the first question, and I don't know if you'll have the answer to it, and that's okay if you don't. But I know that our companies are probably wondering, what their role is. What do you suggest for companies that want to help with R&D in the aviation sector?
That's a great question. I mean, we are an R&D oversight management organization, with the exception of our in-house lab, or labs. We have 5 labs at S&T, but really the main one that's relevant to the aviation space is our transportation security laboratory. And as folks are probably familiar, they're focused on certification and qualification of equipment to ensure it meets detection standards so that it can be fielded. I mean, they're not doing, more, basic to midterm to, prototype building R&D. So we're looking to industry to be our workhorse to do that. We work some with academia, we work some with government labs, but we do a huge amount of work with industry. So how do we find industry? Well, we have a number of ways. We have a long range BAA, which is an active call that's always looking for people that have creative ideas. We have a topic area that's centered right around screening at speed. It's pretty broad. So the idea is, if anybody has an idea, bring it to us. We'll get it. We have an active team that looks at those, that evaluates those, that will reach out and schedule, 30 minutes to an hour to talk about the idea before somebody goes and writes a big proposal and figure out if we're on the same page and it's something we really want to pursue. So that's a great opportunity. Sometimes we have industry days. We'll have joint industry days with TSA. We'll have specific BAA calls when we need something more specific. We have a great small business innovative research SBIR program, helps us reach small businesses. We've worked with companies out in Silicon Valley before, to try to reach folks that don't usually do government work. We've had prize competitions before, which was really cool. We haven't done one of those in a little while. One of the tricks with prize competitions is getting data that can be publicly released. Sometimes the data can be a bit sensitive, and in that case, we were able to get some we could release a few years back, and we had people in their basements writing algorithms for passenger screening with non-threats but simulated threat items, and we still get value out of that to this day, because we handed out $1.5 million over 8 people, and then we got full rights to those algorithms. So I mean, we try to be as creative and innovative as we can on how we reach out to industry, but we fully rely on industry to get where we need to go. And yeah, there are some areas where we can just ride the wave. I mean, one of the things that really helped us out with our real-time passenger imaging was the rise in 5G communications, because a lot of the technologies underpinning that helped us get over that hump. And we could not afford to fund the fundamental research to get the components. The industry took care of that because there's a huge demand for advanced communications. It's everybody's cell phones. But there are also places where there's just not enough market to push things forward. I mean, TSA only can buy so much equipment in a given year based on what Congress gives them. Same thing with our international space. So we do want to be sort of an incubator to help push that forward and to provide R&D funding to folks in industry that can help us get to the next great thing. And we want to utilize their skill sets to get there. Does that answer your
Yeah,
question?
no, definitely. And then for the folks on the call that aren't sure, where can they find those funding opportunities and those calls?
If you search up DHS S&T LRBAA or long range BAA, it'll show up on Google. That's one way. You can reach out to me or to my colleagues. I'm always happy to talk to folks. That's another way, direct way. But yeah, we're definitely we try to go out to these types of engagements so we can meet up with folks. And again, be on the lookout for industry days, because we like to participate in either host or co-host or participate in industry days that TSA hosts, which happen from time to time. So I think those are a few of the ways. Yeah.
And for anyone listening, if you want to be put in touch, you can email me. Happy to put you in touch with the team. And then I'll be also sending out some of these resources in our post-event email. So don't worry about writing them down. I'll send them out.
Yeah.
Um, I have a few more moderators privilege questions, if that's
Okay.
okay.
Sure.
We had Patty before talking about the age of sports, and how that's impacting travel. Is there anything that you're preparing for with the Olympics upcoming? And is there anything from FIFA that you've learned that you're going to be applying?
So that's actually a really interesting question. Um, so I'll answer it with a specific example and then go a little more broad. So a few years ago, we started investing in immersive surveillance type technologies. See everywhere all the time, high resolution, no moving parts, and not a bunch of PTZ. Sort of an integrative eye in the sky view, with part of the idea that it would be beneficial for large public events, but also the idea that in a future curb to gate screening system, there has to be something to coordinate the whole process. I mean, if you're no longer putting people one at a time through a checkpoint, how do you know that somebody passed through a standoff sensor that they maybe even didn't know was there? So we actually were able to do some testing of some immersive surveillance prototypes at two of our World Cup venues in Seattle and San Francisco over the last few months. So I think there is some interplay. Now that's something that's looking a little bit more forward-reaching in the program. We're not necessarily going to be there anytime soon, but we have in the past done some work, especially on the surveillance side, surveillance and detection side, with the sports community. We certainly thought there's definitely some interest in the sports and other large public venues about screening for potentially items that would be of concerning, maybe larger items, things that the technology doesn't always directly one for one go into the aviation community, but potentially could be helpful in the large public spaces in the airport. And perhaps that is a risk determinant factor. That's not my call. That would be TSA's call. But I think there is some overlap, some potential overlap and synergy. And we're definitely, actually, that's one of the things we're doing right now on S&T side, as a directorate as a whole, but also with TSA, is now that they've sort of come through the World Cup and they focused on getting certain technologies out to specific airports that were sort of prototype pilot airports for the World Cup. We're now having those discussions with the Olympics. And one of the things that TSA has recently publicized are doing, and something we've kind of been waving the flag on for a long time at S&T that we think is an exciting possibility, is remote off-site screening. So if you just don't have the capacity at an airport, and the Olympics would be a great example, if LAX and Orange County are just oversaturated with folks, bring the checkpoint out of the airport, find a place to set it up, and then get people straight to their gate. I think that's a great example of opportunity. It's something we could consider doing. LA 28, not on the books yet. It's still some of the conversations we're having, but there's definitely, I think, some overlap between that, that, and that kind of thing could be. It could be a major sports venue. It could be a casino on the Vegas Strip. It could be Ohio State University with 50,000 kids leaving the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. There's anytime you have a lot of people, a cruise ship, anytime you have a lot of people needing to get through an airport and you don't want to put them through the few checkpoints the airport already has, how do we rethink how we do business? So I think there's definitely some parallels there.
And that leads perfectly into my next question for you, which is like, where are other ways that what are other sectors that you see this technology applicable for? I mean, you covered a few. Are there any others? And, are you working with other areas of DHS to bring some of these applicable technologies there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the obvious one is the crowded spaces, the large events, the national special security events. I work really closely with our program team at S&T that covers that space. But there's also a lot of overlap between our operational components missions. So we work a lot with our port of entry security team. Some of the things they're looking at, looking for radiation screening at the border, not so applicable, but they're very interested in biometrics and entry exit biometrics. So as TSA looks more towards what biometrics may look like and what the opportunities are in futuristic checkpoints, there may be a lot of interplay between their role and ports of entry and work we do with CBP, Secret Service. We work a lot with the service because they're screening people too, and sometimes our operations are a little bit different, and sometimes they're very, very similar. And that's kind of goes back to my very opening salvo of the discussion, and that's one of the reasons S&T exists, is to be able to sort of be an eye in the sky, helping to coordinate to the extent we can and get more value for R&D dollars by utilizing it across mission space and across different components.
Yeah, and I think it's a really unique and cool mission, that it could be so universal across
Yeah,
the mission.
I've been here 20 years and I haven't gotten bored. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And my last question is related to that. So you were the branch chief for S&T's Resilience Systems Division. And I just, this it doesn't even have to do with aviation as much, but how do you build resilience in the modern age today? From your experience,
Yeah.
what are some tips?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I was going to say a little bit of a side note on that. My first experience with TSA as an S&T employee, not as a traveler, because I've been through TSA a number of times, was not on the aviation side. Early on, I worked a lot with the mass transit and the highway and motor carriers teams, and that's something that a lot of people don't think about, is the fact that TSA has responsibility or oversight for other transportation modalities in the U.S. So mass transit's a big one. Highways, motor carriers, freight rail, maritime, pipelines all have an aspect that falls under TSA. It's just aviation gets the vast majority of the attention and the budget and the press and all the rest of that. So I think that's always worth thinking about, and they're not always dissimilar. I mean, UAS came up, right? UAS is not my area, but we have a huge counter UAS team at S&T that works across the department, including with TSA. Cyber is not my area, but we also have a very dedicated team of cyber experts that work in that area. So there's definitely multiple points of entry to make sure we address what's a very complex space. I mean, to the resiliency as a whole, I look at resiliency as very closely tied to risk. I think to be resilient, you really have to understand what your risks are and understand, how you can best buy down your risk, where you can afford to, where you can do it from a technology perspective, where you can do it from an operational perspective. We've even done this in our futures workshops I mentioned before. We've run scenarios with different risk appetites or different public perception appetites. We've said, there was one we did where we had a group that said anything goes. People are so concerned about their security, they're willing to considerably sacrifice on privacy and their personal information. They're willing to relinquish and that kind of thing. Everything to that's like a third rail, and see what kind of future states people come up with those different parameters in place. So that's a little bit off subject, but I think resiliency, I mean, you have to look at it as overall risk and how do what paths can you take to, with all the constraints that you have, which could change tomorrow. That's one of the crazy things about the field we work in is, any number of things and it might be something that, an event that happens in the aviation ecosystem. It might be something that happens somewhere else that has bearing on our space, or might not have bearing on our space, but might have positive or negative bearing on our budget based on, because at some point, it's kind of a zero sum game. There's only so much funding for R&D, and I'm not gonna wave the flag, but I've done my own calculations on S&T's budget when I came versus now inflation adjusted, and we're not getting any more R&D money these days. If anything, things are going in a negative direction. So we have to be really smart with the resources we have.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing for you is also how important it is to have that flexibility, whether it's with your people, with your systems, with your technology. I think
Yeah,
that's something applicable across sectors. Definitely something that we're trying to, tell our companies to do in this age because you never know what's going to happen.
yeah, yeah.
Well, thank you for being here today. We really appreciate this information. I'm going to pass along all of the resources that you guys have to everyone who's come today. Do you have any last words for the group before we close out?
No, I think I've talked enough, but I really appreciate everybody's attention. I appreciate the folks that really set up the space really well, and I appreciate the notes you guys let me take. That probably become some sound bites in future presentations because and it's good to see you, Chris, and Patricia as well. And it's been a little while, but thank you all. Appreciate it today.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Please join us for our next symposiums. We have one coming up on higher education in September, and then one on healthcare in October. And then I'm planning our symposiums for next year, so stay tuned. But there will be one on transportation. Like we were saying earlier, TSA covers all modes of transportation, not just aviation. So we'll be touching on that a little bit next year when we do this again. Thank you to all our speakers. Thank you to our sponsors, ACRE and HID, and to our partners, Airports Council International North America. Again, I will share all of the information from today in a post-event email, and the recording will be online. So thank you for your attention today. I know it was long, but I hope that you learned and enjoyed the program with us, and we'll see you soon.